The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, should Canada and Mexico team up to take on Donald Trump? Then, Germany's husband-wife job-sharing ambassadors to Canada on relations between our two countries. That's all ahead on The Agenda. With the federal election campaign over and Mark Carney's Liberals securing a new mandate from Canadians, what relationships should the government prioritize going forward in its trade war with the Trump administration? Well, one country we might look to is Mexico. Given its own close geographic proximity and strained relationship with the U.S., what opportunities might exist for Canada and Mexico to team up against Trump? Let's explore that. In Mexico City, we welcome José Luis Granados Sella, journalist and co-host of the Soberania Mexican Politics podcast. And with us here in studio, Solange Marquez Espinoza, geopolitical analyst and editor of Mexico and Canada, Two Nations in a North American Partnership. And Alejandro Garcia Magos, lecturer of political science at the University of Toronto, and we are delighted to have you two here in our studio. And Jose Luis, thank you for being there for us on the line from Mexico City. I'm going to start by just reading here an English translation of Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum's congratulating Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney. This was on X, and here we go. On behalf of the people and government of Mexico, we congratulate Prime Minister Mark Carney on his victory in the recent Canadian elections. We look forward to continuing to work with our trading partner. Well, of course, we want to know how much we can read into that. So, Jose Luis, tell us, how is the news of Mark Carney staying on as Prime Minister being received in Mexico?
Well, generally, I'd say that people feel good about it. I would say first and foremost, most Mexicans are probably relieved that Trump won't have an ideological ally in Canada, and that the positive relationship that Mexico and Canada have had historically will likely continue with this new leadership, with this new mandate. I think it was very important that Carney got this mandate, having arrived to the Prime Minister's office through an internal election, but now has received that blessing from the people of Canada.
Solange, what do you think about the Carney victory and how Mexicans are taking it?
Well, I think Mexico is taking it with cautious optimism, especially because some of the Carney's first approaches are not Mexico. So I think that is important to take into account.
You know, Prime Minister Carney did not mention Mexico in his victory speech the other night, but he and President Sheinbaum apparently did speak by telephone on the 1st of April. Can you tell us about what the key takeaways from that phone call might have been?
Yes. One thing that I noticed in the press release of that phone call, it was that it was very short, very minimal. It was as if almost they spoke on the phone, that's it. One thing that I was missing in that press release was the state of the Mexico-Canada relation. As we remember last year, Mr. López Obrador put them on hold, right? Mm-hmm. And we still don't know if they are still on hold. We still don't know if they are, the criticism that the Canadian ambassador levied against the government of López Obrador in terms of the judicial reform. Nothing was said about that. So it was there was a lot of things that was not said in that press release.
Okay, well, let's follow up. Jose Luis, I'll get you back in here. To what extent do you think the Carney victory potentially could signal a different approach to Canadian-Mexican relations from the way Justin Trudeau ran things?
I hope it does represent a difference. In fact, the last time you and I talked here on the program, you mentioned that there were some voices inside of the PMO that seem to welcome this effort to throw Mexico under a bus in Canada's dealings with the United States, hoping that that would save Canada's skin in all of this. So I'm hoping that Carney's election victory does represent a break from that attitude, and that there is an approach that is constructive and respectful of the sovereignty. I was very, very struck by Carney's words in his victory speech when he talked, and I keep making this joke, like a Latin American populist, talking about how the U.S. wants Canada's territory and resources. That's actually language that's very familiar to us here in Mexico, and I think that could be an opportunity for us to approach this relationship as equals. And I think that if Carney's election here represents a move away from that paternalism that we did see, not exactly from Trudeau, but certainly Canadian politicians like Doug Ford, then I think it could be positive for the relationship to have that respect between partners.
I was going to bring up the Ford example, in fact, Solange, because Doug Ford, of course, talks about this Am-Can relationship, which quite pointedly does not include Mexico. He wants to create a fortress of Canada and the United States. Any suspicion about whether Carney is onside or offside with that approach?
Well, as I started, my main concern is that Carney hasn't mentioned Mexico in his last speeches. His first approach, I think, is the European Union. Of course, he's trying to diversify the trade from Canada and trying to find new allies. But I think Mexico is not in the first place in that list. And it concerns me because Carney, looking up to the CUSMA, is not seen as a trilateral relation, as a strategy. I think he is looking for a bilateral relationship with the United States, and I think that is a problem, and it will be a problem with Mexico.
You would prefer a trilateral as opposed to a bilateral situation?
Of course. And I think it's the best thing for Mexico, and it's the best thing for Canada too. In 2019, when the first CUSMA was negotiated with Donald Trump in his first term, he tried to divide Mexico and Canada. He wanted a bilateral agreement in that time. And at the end of the day, Mexico and Canada agreed, and they understood that they're stronger together. So I hope Mark Carney understands that, and he's going to look for a trilateral agreement instead of a bilateral one.
Well, let's follow up on that. There's an excerpt from an open letter to Prime Minister Carney. This is from the Business Council of Canada. For more than 6 decades, agreements such as the Auto Pact, the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and now the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, have provided the certainty and preferential market access necessary to make North America a global trade and investment superpower. Based on those agreements, robust supply chains have been built to connect communities across the continent. In recent weeks, you have indicated, Prime Minister, that you intend to immediately begin comprehensive, possibly bilateral negotiations with the United States for a new economic and security relationship. In our view, a bilateral arrangement could create unnecessary risk and undermine Canada's mutually beneficial trilateral economic partnership with the United States and Mexico. Okay, Alejandro, you want to come in there and tell us whether you like or don't like the sound of that?
I like the sounds, but I think you mentioned a key word here, which is certainty. Mm-hmm. That certainty in Mexico is gone. These are the words of the ambassador, the Canadian ambassador to Mexico, very concerned about the dismantling of the judiciary, the democratic erosion that we're seeing in the country. So when we talk about the idea of keeping Mexico as a trade partner, we also need to put into context what's going on in Mexico, which is many observers are seeing a process of political decay, which is something that we need to consider.
Okay. Jose Luis, how about you on that Business Council of Canada letter and how you react to it?
I think it's interesting when the criticism is aimed at Mexico for deepening its democracy. I personally think that it's actually favorable to see the election of judiciary. I don't consider it to be an erosion, when, especially given that we have what is clearly an authoritarian state in the United States with that kind of leadership that we have in Washington right now. I think if there is uncertainty in the trilateral relationship, it's coming from the United States. And that actually makes more sense for Canada to have a closer relationship with Mexico, because in a lot of ways, we're in the same boat. We have the same kind of very deeply tied economic relationship to the United States, an export-oriented economy, and we have the 2026 USMCA negotiations coming up. And given the fact that the party that has most disrupted this economic relationship has actually been Trump, we need to actually get together to prepare ourselves for that renegotiation, because that's going to be the true test of that certainty, whether or not businesses are going to be able to trust that this long-standing economic partnership is actually going to stay in place. And I don't think the risk comes from Mexico, but actually from the United States.
All right, Solange, do you believe that the Trump administration's approach to North American affairs actually behooves Canada and Mexico to get closer together?
Yeah, I would think that it's supposed to be the logical consequence. I am not quite sure that politically our leaders are doing that, not even in Mexico, nor in Canada.
Why not?
Because in Mexico, in the case of Mexico, they are more interested on domestic issues. And I think, unfortunately, the North American partnership is not in the priority list in Mexico. And as we have seen in the last days here in Canada, well, it appears that electoral issues were more important. Of course, I understand that, but were more important, and the trilateral relation and the bilateral relation with Mexico was not in the agenda because it was not important at that moment. My hope is that after the election, and when all these trade issues and policy issues started to be more important than the election, they are going to take these things into account, and they are going to start strengthening the lines of communication with Mexico.
Alejandro.
Referring to what Jose Luis said, he mentioned that Mexico and Canada are in the same boat. I differ with that. Mexico and the US are in the same boat. Both countries are going a process of democratic erosion, of autocratization. Canada, in this election in Monday, we actually see an electorate that very strongly claims that we don't want to follow that path, that we reject that form of authoritarian populism. That is the message that I'm getting. So I don't see Mexico and Canada politically getting aligned. If anything, we see Canada moving this way to a democratic liberal model, and Mexico mingling with the likes of Venezuela, of Nicaragua, being buddies with the Cubans. So they are in different paths here. We're not in the same boat.
I don't necessarily want to read too much into this, but Jose Luis, I will get your view on this, and that is when Mark Carney did become prime minister, immediately after he won the leadership convention earlier this year, his first trip was not to the United States, it was not to Mexico, it was to Europe, right? He went over and he first met with the United Kingdom. What do you think that says about his priorities vis-a-vis Mexico?
I think it says very clearly where his priorities are. You know, I actually found it a little bit disappointing that he took almost a month to get in contact with Sheinbaum, given the importance of this relationship. And it speaks a bit to a fact to where they think things are headed. Canada very much is interested in deepening relationships with other parts of the world. In his victory speech, he mentions Asia, Europe, whereas Mexico, its economic priorities are, as Solange said, on sort of an economic nationalism, a refocus on the national economy, on strengthening the purchasing power of the working classes here, expanding, raising the minimum wage, expanding social programs. And so it's a very different focus in that sense. And I do think that in that regard, it might be different. But on the point around democracy, you know, yes, Canada had a free, fair election, but it's still a polarized country. If you look at the results, right, it's still a minority government that doesn't have quite the same stability. Whereas here in Mexico, you know, Alejandro may disagree with the ideological orientation of this government, but it's extremely popular. Poll after poll puts Claudia Sheinbaum at 80% support. She won a landslide victory in the presidential election. Her party and its governing coalition has a super majority in Congress, and this is all the product of a democratic process. So I don't consider that to be a slide. It's a very different system, but it's one that is headed in a very democratic direction.
Alejandro?
Yes. So a divided electorate is no sign of authoritarianism. Democratic erosion and the dismantling of the judiciary is a sign of democratic erosion and autocratization. Coming from the left or the right, it doesn't matter. The fact is that in Mexico, the institutions that took 20 years to build that sustain a democracy have been completely destroyed in the last 6 years.
Solange.
Yeah, I just want to say for Canadian interest, what is happening in Mexico is the weakening of democratic institutions. Unfortunately, if we don't have a judicial power that is independent, if we don't have the credibility of the institutions that will protect the investments of Canadian companies, it will damage the relationship with Mexico and Canada. So that's in that I agree with Alejandro, because that is a problem. And unfortunately, popularity doesn't mean it is democratic. Because popularity, we can be the popularity. We can see, for example, El Salvador, and Nayib Bukele has a very high rating approvals. It doesn't mean that it is democratic. So democracy is different, and it is institutions that matter. And for Canadian interests, it is this weakening of democratic institutions that matter.
Jose Luis, you want to come back at that?
Well, I would say that here in Mexico, the Mexican population, it's not just about popularity, but actually expressed for the first time ever an actual satisfaction in a 2024 poll by Latino Barometer in its democracy. These democratic institutions of the neoliberal democratic transition that happened following the election of Fox in the year 2000, I think were, yes, built inside of the model of a liberal democratic order, but one that actually didn't deliver very many results to the population. And that's why you saw so much dissatisfaction with the existing democratic model in Mexico, and why there's such a deep embrace of that, because it's actually delivering things to the vast majority, the poor majority here in the country. It's not just about being popular, but in fact, it's about actually having a positive impact in the material conditions of working class campesinos here in Mexico. And I think that actually is an expression of democratic willingness to engage with the population, of not serving just the elites and the policymakers and the pundits, but actually the Mexican population itself.
You have provoked Alejandro, who wants one more comment on this.
Sure.
Yeah. So to say that the democratic transition happened after the victory of Fox in 2000, that's factually wrong. The democratic transition in Mexico starts in 1977 and ends in 1996. And throughout this process, everything was around giving autonomy to the electoral authorities, so the government did not have a say and control in counting the votes. That process went from 77 to 1996, 4 years before Fox even was in the presidency.
Okay, I think we've had a good kick at this one. I want to have us look forward now and get your opinions on where you think the best opportunities, Solange, to you first, for increased collaboration, increased trade, increased whatever, better relations between Mexico and Canada. How does that look to you?
Well, for me, Mexico and Canada should start working together, start forming a working group on trade, especially because they need to strengthen the supply chains. What is happening with the U.S. and all these threats on tariffs and everything is that the supply chains are under siege, if I can say that. So what Mexico and Canada should secure is the supply chains. So how they start to manage this economic resilience for both countries is to start talking, start the meetings, start parliamentary meetings, bilateral. But I think they have a lot of opportunities, even in sectors that might seem competitors, for example, the automotive sector.
Jose Luis, how about you? Where are the opportunities going forward?
Certainly. I think the world international order is being remade. I agree with Carney when he said in his speech that it seems that we're at a turning point. He called it a hinge moment. But I do think it's important to pay attention of what direction we're going in. Mark Carney wrote a book in 2021. It's basically a defense of the existing neoliberal order. And I worry that his representation of the status quo is not going to get Canada out of this situation. Mexico has chosen an anti-neoliberal path, and I think that is delivering real results to the population. I want to be emphatic about that. And so we'll see what happens in moving forward, because things are happening quickly. And I think the more that we're able to learn from positive experiences, I think the better we'll be. And I would actually encourage Canadians to look to Mexico, to not necessarily listen to these pundits that want to drive home this point of an authoritarian regression when actually the satisfaction levels here in Mexico, the happiness indices here in Mexico are actually quite good. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's moving away from the neoliberal model. And that's something that maybe Canadians can learn from, and that could be a product of closer exchanges between our countries.
Alejandro, opportunities between our countries going forward, what do you see?
The opportunities are there, but I think Mr. Carney will have to make a decision in terms of how close he wants to associate with a government that is undermining democratic institutions in the Americas. It's not going to look very nice for Mr. Carney to be in that space. Speaking of, Jose Luis mentioned saying, don't look at what's happening in Mexico. No, yes, look at what's happening in Mexico. It's very important. By the way, Elections Canada play a pivotal role in the democratization of Mexico. Elections Canada helped Mexico during those years, 77 to 1996, to create the Instituto Nacional Electoral, who allowed for free and fair elections in the country. So Canada should be very proud of being a place where it's exporting democracy. Canada should be proud that they played a pivotal role in Mexico in those years of democratization. And now the question for Carney is, what role is he going to play? Is he going to support democracy in Mexico? Is he going to support pro-democracy forces that are trying to prevent the complete destruction of institutions of democracy in Mexico? Or he's going to look to their side and don't try to mess with that?
I don't know what his priority is right now. I suspect it will have more to do with trying to exploit potential business opportunities between the two countries. Solange, maybe in terms of mining, what do you see happening there?
Yeah, in terms of mining, rare minerals, I think there is an opportunity there. Agricultural also is an important sector. But I think there is something very important for Canada and why Canada and Mexico should stay together. And it is also because Canada has a lot of influence in the region, in Latin American region, because of all the aid and help in different issues, in the case of Mexico, electoral and different issues. And the influence of Canada is very positive for the region in terms of democratic values and everything. So when Canada back up, as the United States are doing now, if they back up, the problem is that there are other actors willing to take that space. In this case, it's China. And China will not have any problem to take the place that Canada do not want to play in Latin America and specifically in Mexico. So that is a very important reason why Canada should stay and should maintain and strengthen the relationship with Mexico and, of course, with Latin American countries.
Jose Luis, I need to ask you about the auto industry. And of course, we have a tripartite arrangement, at least for a little while longer, between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. If Canada and Mexico wanted to get closer together in the auto industry, I mean, there's this big country, America, that's in the way. So how do we do it?
I think that's why we have to emphasize as far as we can and hopefully succeed in that in the tripartite arrangement, because, I was looking at a report from the Congressional Research Service. They say auto parts will cross the border, either Canada, US, Mexico, up to 8 times before it's actually put into final assembly. So it'd be very difficult without that. But if that is the direction where things will go, then we need to think about how we can actually develop the infrastructure, the different kinds of arrangements with other parts of the world in order to do that, because of the behemoth to Canada's south and Mexico's north, which again, I think actually represents the biggest threat, the biggest authoritarian risk for the region, far more than Mexico does. When they talk about these actors here that are standing up for democracy in Mexico, I wonder who he's talking about. Is it perhaps somebody like former President Ernesto Zedillo, who recently published a letter and published in an interview with Nexos, making many similar arguments here. I will say here in Mexico, Zedillo's comments were not well received by the vast majority of the population. It's very difficult to hear these arguments about a so-called tyranny approaching here in Mexico when it's coming from a figure who is responsible for massacres, who is accused of human rights violations, who allowed the army to develop paramilitary forces in Chiapas, which engaged in horrific crimes like in Actial. So here in Mexico, I would say, again, the perspective about the democratic nature of the country is really quite different, and it's not one that is shared by other members here of the panel. And I think that Carney actually might be interested in becoming close with somebody like Sheinbaum because of her immense popularity, not just in Mexico, but the profile that she has in the world, with various news outlets now actually considering, is she the anti-Trump, because how successfully she has been in navigating this very difficult relationship, and the lessons that can be drawn for that for Canada as now it approaches with this new leadership the U.S.-Canada relationship.
Yeah, we're very focused on the Canadian-Mexican relationship here, and I don't want to go too far down the path of having you two argue different versions of Mexican history here, but since Jose Luis went there, I'll give you a short chance to respond, and then let's get back on the path. Go ahead.
Jose Luis asked, who am I referring to? I'm going to give you just a few numbers, just a few names, sorry. Carlos Castillo Peraza, Alberto Castillo, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, Luis González de Alba.
Who are these people?
I'm answering a question. He said, like, who was involved in that construction of democracy? He said, like, Cedillo. Yes, Cedillo, but a lot of Mexicans from all kinds, from the right to the left, they were involved in the construction of democracy, which in the last years it has been eroded by Mr. Lopez and Mr. Sheinbaum.
Okay, back on the path here. What do you see as the biggest obstacles to preventing Canada and Mexico from getting closer together?
Again, the diverging paths politically that both countries have. Canada is taking a very clear stance that they don't want to go the path of populism. They don't like the likes of Trump. They are strengthening their democratic institutions. And Mexico has taken a different path. And that gulf has just going to be increasing. And it's going to create diplomatic problems, as we saw last year when the Canadian ambassador criticized the attempts of the Lopez administration to pass an electoral reform that essentially eliminates the division of powers in the country. That caused diplomatic tension. It's still there, it's still simmering. So that, in my view, that's going to be the main problem, that these countries are politically diverging in different directions.
Well, having said that, Jose Luis, do you think, on the other hand, that the existence of Trump kind of forces Canada and Mexico to be closer together to deal with this, well, use whatever word you like to describe the current administration that we have to share this continent with? What do you think?
I think geopolitically, it makes a lot of sense. We are smaller countries. We're middle-income countries. We can't compete with the United States the way that perhaps China could. So diversifying those relationships and having actually closer connections that don't pass through the United States, I think makes perfect sense for this relationship. And I agree with Solange. Canada's place in the world has high regard. I think sometimes it's unearned, but certainly it is viewed as a champion of human rights. But when we talk about human rights, certainly here in Mexico, we don't limit it to just civil and political rights, but the economic, the social, the cultural rights as well. And I hope that Sheinbaum and Carney could actually come together around this shared understanding about a commitment to human rights, about expanding the social safety net, about making sure that people don't fall through the cracks, about actually making sure that we're meeting our constitutional obligations. I think Carney very much would find a partner in Sheinbaum with that.
Solange.
Yeah, just a quick comment about the challenges, because I agree. The political instability in Mexico and the policy changes in Mexico make it difficult to continue the relationship, especially, for example, in energy sector. When Mexico started the last administration to change the policy regulation, it makes for Canadian companies investments there to be completely uncertain. So those companies started to suffer a lot because of the nationalistic view from Mexico on the energy production. So that is another challenge that Canada and Mexico has ahead on the table for their relationship.
Just a few minutes to go here. We have a G7 meeting coming up in June in Alberta, in this country. Jose Luis, Claudia Sheinbaum, should she be at the table?
Mexico has participated in other meetings of the G8 when it was still the G8, but since it's been the G7, there hasn't been that much participation. I think it would be a good idea to have an invitation. It's very unlikely that Sheinbaum herself would attend. She is one who, like Lopez Obrador before her, is very much focused on the domestic agenda. In fact, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean State, which is kind of an alternative to the OAS, recently had a meeting, and the host, Xiomara Castro of Honduras, had to basically beg Sheinbaum to attend, and she ultimately did convince her, but she said, I'm only going for half a day. So I think it would be difficult, even if there was an invitation for Sheinbaum to go, but certainly I think if the invitation came, she would certainly send a high-level representation from her government. I do think that that would be positive to have that there. Mexico has an important place, and I think if Canada is interested in a better relationship with the rest of Latin America, I think going through Mexico and being a partner of Mexico is a good way to start.
Well, if Canada invited the Mexican president to come, but she didn't and sent somebody else, would that be problematic?
Absolutely.
I would hope that they wouldn't take offense to it or take it personally in that regard. Like I said, Sheinbaum is not one to necessarily put too much emphasis on the foreign agenda. She did attend the G20, and so there is that presence, and like the SELAC I mentioned. But I wouldn't take it personally if she doesn't go. She's very much focused on the domestic agenda here. She said so herself, that it's just there's so much to do. She's kind of a very I don't want to say micromanager, but they say she's very data-driven. She always wants to hear information directly from her cabinet. So I think that's probably why she would decline.
You know, you can't see this here, but Solange has been shaking her head from the beginning of that answer you gave. Why are you shaking your head so much?
Because it is very sad that our previous administration and this administration don't understand the place that Mexico can play in the international arena. So saying that that Claudia Sheinbaum would not attend the G7 meeting if she received, it is kind of, come on, you cannot take it personally. Of course it is personal, because these meetings are very high level. You are not expecting a ministry. You are expecting the head of state doing their job, and it is an opportunity for Mexico to demonstrate the importance of Mexico. We are a big and very important economy in the world, and we played a very important role in Latin American issues and also in other parts of the North American partnership. So saying that Mexico can receive this G7 invitation and not attend, it will be absolutely nonsense.
What do you think?
I agree with Solange. About invitation, no. I don't think they should invite her.
Don't invite her?
No. And the reason is because I would like to see Carney using his power to put pressure on Mexico, put pressure on the president. No one is going to save Mexican democracy. No one is going to save the judiciary. It's only Mexicans that can do it. But it would help if someone at least points and puts a little political pressure, diplomatic pressure, and say, hey, we're seeing what you're doing, we don't like it, we need certainty, and we want to have a democratic partner in Mexico.
Jose Luis, what is the one thing you would like Prime Minister Carney to prioritize when it comes to the Canadian-Mexican relationship?
Respect for sovereignty. I think Carney has been talking about Canadian sovereignty. I think we should take him up on that, and that we agree. Claudia Sheinbaum actually stood up for Canadian sovereignty when Trump was attacking Trudeau, saying that that was an inappropriate way of referring to a leader. And so I hope that that's the way it goes. And that means not interfering, not actually taking Alejandro up on his advice to say that they should put diplomatic pressure because of the domestic considerations here. I think it would be inappropriate, and it would be somewhat hypocritical given his current rhetoric about respect for sovereignty. And as long as we can, of course, and even on that sense as well, of inviting Canadian investment if they're interested, as long as they respect Mexican environmental laws and labor laws, I think that kind of relationship can certainly flourish.
Alejandro.
Well, of course, it can be a surprise. I would like to see Carney putting first a democratic rule of law in Mexico in the agenda, in the conversations. Of course, business, industry, making money, of course, but putting on top of the agenda respect for democratic institutions, rule of law, and of course, human rights, which in Mexico right now, it's in a huge crisis.
Solange.
Well, I think economic resilience, and to do that, they need a reliable partner. A reliable partner have strong institutions, democratic institutions. So I think that.
Can I thank the three of you not only for appearing on our program tonight, but for disagreeing in such a civil way. We love civil disagreement here, and try to model that behavior to other members of the media and political leaders in the country. So bravo. Jose Luis Granado Sella, Solange Marquez Espinoza, Alejandro Garcia Magos. Great to have you all on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you so much.
In the world of international affairs, more than 130 countries have diplomatic missions in Canada. But the German ambassador to Canada is a bit different. That's because there are two of them who split the job. They are the husband and wife team of Tjoven Bellman and Matthias Luttenberg. And we thought we'd invite them in to better understand how all this works and dig into some of the global issues affecting our two countries. Ambassadors, it is great to have you here. Willkommen.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Not at all. Let's find out a bit about you two for starters. How did you two meet?
In diplomatic school.
Is that right? Okay. And was it love at first sight?
Well, actually, it took some time.
It did.
But I think there was a lot of sympathy. Actually, we were playing together in the Shakespeare theatre on stage, where we actually were pretending to be a couple, at least on stage, in our first year together.
Okay. And you've been married how long now?
It's 15 years.
15 years.
Yeah.
So who thought of the idea of having one ambassador's job split between two people?
It was actually, the story started in Canada in 2017, not on the level of ambassadors, but on the level of Consul General in Montreal. And a married couple went there, and they were the first ones to share the job of a head of a mission.
And which one of you said, I wonder if we could do this?
I think we both liked the idea.
Yeah?
Yeah. Because we both had very demanding positions in headquarters for the last 11 years, basically. And so we thought it's high time to spend more time with the kids and to also find some time for ourselves.
So the way it works is that you take turns. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. We rotate every 8 months.
Every 8 months. So he is the ambassador right now.
Exactly.
And you were the ambassador before.
Yes.
Okay. Do you each get, how much do you get paid? Like, do you get double salary?
It's only one salary.
One salary between the two of you. Okay. When you approached presumably the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Germany and said, we have this idea, what was the reaction?
I think in the beginning they just took note of it, and as there were already colleagues who were doing this in Sweden and in Slovenia at that time, they were not surprised, but I think they were very forthcoming in helping us to pursue this path.
How does it actually work?
So we are both accredited officially here in Canada. We presented our credentials together at the Governor General's. As we said, we rotate every 8 months. We inform the Canadian authorities before in writing that now there is a rotation and the other person is in charge. And then there's only one person in charge, only one ambassador.
But, okay, so you're in charge at the moment, but I can't believe that you just sort of divorce yourself from the job entirely and don't read emails and don't stay up on things, right?
Actually, I don't.
You don't? Really?
I read the news, of course,
Yeah.
and we're here together, of course. Whenever we have functions at our house, which happens very regularly, I'm there. But other than that, I'm not reading any job-related emails at all.
And you're not in the briefings or anything?
No.
And you were not in the previous time when she was the ambassador?
I was not. I hardly went to the embassy, maybe 4 or 5 times to do some administrative stuff. But this is the way it should be. Also, look into the outside. The presentation should be very clear. There's only one person in charge. We don't want to confuse anybody. And I think it's also better for our team and the embassy to know exactly who is the person to address.
Okay. How long is your term as an ambassador?
Normally it's 4 years. In our case, we hope to stay for 5 years due to schooling reasons from our children.
You want your kids to have the chance to finish the
Yeah.
whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay. And is the term renewable?
It's extendable.
It's extendable. Okay, I see. What is the downside of doing this?
Only one salary. Other than that, I can't think of many downsides.
Coming from this 8-month experience of not working, of course, there are times when you wish you could do a little more than just taking care of the children. We are both professional diplomats, and we feel that we have something to invest into the German-Canadian relationship, and you would like to be following things closely. But I think you will be in that phase as well at some point in these 8 months. But this is also the only thing I could think about, and I never really pitied myself for doing this. I was looking forward to working, but I think I will also be fine not working in 8 months from now.
Okay, I'm going to get mischievous here, okay? Let's make some trouble. What happens Okay, you're the ambassador right now, and you are taking, let's say, a particular approach to dealing with an issue. Mm-hmm. And then she becomes the ambassador in December, and she thinks to herself, this is a dumb way to handle this. We shouldn't be doing this. I want to do this exactly opposite. What do you do?
Well, I think on the broad line of things, we are very much aligned, and we've worked in similar issues for a long time. We're very different characters, though. So I don't know. I think the decision that the one takes has to be respected, and I don't think you can completely change course every 8 months. That would drive everybody crazy. So we just have to make sure that if there are very important decisions to take, that we consult each other and we do it in a way that there is continuity in the job.
Absolutely, and I think we also carry a responsibility for this job-sharing model to work. And if we start confusing our staff or even our Canadian counterparts, then we would not do a favor to the whole undertaking, because we want people also to be encouraged to share their jobs and make it a success story. Also means that from time to time, of course, we are constantly coordinating what we're doing, but on these major questions, we shouldn't create the impression as if we were just really black and white and falling apart at every important juncture.
But you've inherited the job now from her. Is there anything she did that you have reversed?
I put some more pictures to the wall.
Besides more pictures on the wall. Anything of significance you have changed?
Well, not yet, I would say.
Oh, yeah. So you're holding out the possibility.
Sometimes
He's the much nicer guy.
I might not even know what she has done, because I'm not 100% informed about everything that was already brought on the way. But sometimes I'm told by colleagues, oh, maybe your wife would have done that differently. But that's okay, because we are different characters. And Berlin didn't send one ambassador, but 2 ambassadors. And there's a price everybody has to pay.
Okay, let's talk about some of the issues that are happening in the world right now that both your country and ours are facing. And we will start with the most obvious one, and that is the President of the United States today. We're in a trade war with him. We're in a tariff war with him. He wants to annex our country. These are usually not the ways to make friends and influence people, but this is President Trump. How are you, I'll start with the current ambassador then, how are you Germans getting along with President Trump these days?
Well, to begin with, the U.S. are our most important trade partner, and I think that tells you a lot about how we look at our relationship. We are deeply grateful for everything the U.S. have done ever since the Second World War and before, and therefore we feel this close relationship to the U.S. as a nation. I'm not going to go too much into detail what we think about the current president's decisions regarding tariffs or regarding Canada and the announcements that he makes, and this, of course, I think it's enough to say that, and our Chancellor also said the same, borders cannot be moved forcibly. We are very much on the side of Canada. We, as our Foreign Minister said, we have your back when it comes to diversifying your trade relations, your political relations. But of course, we are following with great concern also the discussion about security in Europe and for Europe, because we are under the umbrella of the United States of America, and we in any way would like to keep that relationship going. So I'm sure that also a new German government will invest a lot into a good relationship to the United States of America.
When did you give up being ambassador? When did you stop?
In early April.
Early April. Oh, so just very recently. Mm-hmm. Okay, so when Trump became president, you were on the job.
I was on the job.
And what did you think about that when he became the president and started talking about tariffs and talking about NATO, and he's not such a fan of NATO? What did you think?
Yeah, I think we knew what a Trump presidency would mean. We've seen his first term. We knew what the president stands for, and he's been always very public and clear about what he stands for. So on the tariff piece, the German government has been very clear that we want free trade, and we want to trade more with the United States, not less. And we believe in a trade war, everybody will lose. And American customers will lose, and the American people will lose, which is why we have, and from the European Union side, have offered to get rid of tariffs instead of establishing new ones. But the EU has also been very clear, and it's the EU for Germany that is in the lead in these negotiations, that if tariffs continue, there will be a reaction.
You have heard Donald Trump talk about the fact that he thinks your country and mine are a bunch of freeloaders when it comes to military spending in NATO. And never mind 2%, he wants it up around 5%. Is that something Germany is prepared to do?
Well, I think at least we have a serious discussion about stepping ahead and maybe moving the target from 2% to somewhere else. If that's then 3% or something around 3%, of course will be in the hands of a new government to decide. But I think everybody in Germany understands that there's a need to look at these numbers again. Are they still sufficient to really guarantee that Germany will be a safe and secure country in the future, given Russia's war of aggression, which is now going on for more than 3 years against Ukraine? So therefore, I think this discussion is ongoing. And if you look at the new coalition agreement, you will see that there's a lot of readiness amongst the new coalition partners to also take this direction.
Do you think Germany needs to spend more than 2% of its gross domestic product on military?
Yes.
How much more?
The coalition agreement of our government doesn't have a figure, but I think the discussion in Germany, given the clear threat level we face, is more around 3 to 3.5% than around 2%. We are at 2.1% at the moment. But if nobody's under any illusions that Vladimir Putin has imperial ambitions beyond Ukraine and in Europe, and that's much more concrete than here in Canada. We really are in a race against time, upping our defenses in order to prevent a big war from happening. And, the German, our chief of defense is saying publicly he wants the German armed forces to be war ready by 2029, which is not something you hear here in Canada.
Well, I was going to say, for the last 80 years, Germany has taken, militarily at least, a bit of a restraining role in Europe and has tried not to spend too much on military and not to be too chest-thumpy for obvious reasons. Do you think it's time to change that approach, Ambassador?
Well, I think we have changed it already. I just saw the numbers this morning on who are the major spenders on defense around the globe. And of course, nobody reaches the US, and Russia is unfortunately also spending a lot of money. But Germany has done a great step forward. We are now spending, I think, we're the third biggest spender on military around the globe these days. It has to do, of course, with the security perception that we have in Germany, but also with our engagement for Ukraine's security and defense. And therefore, this is remarkable. I also saw figures that 22 out of the NATO members have now reached the 2%, but there's still some who haven't. And I think it's an encouragement to everybody to see if it's possible to reach at least this 2% at this point of time.
Are you also disappointed with Canada that we are not at 2%? Trump is very disappointed. Are you?
We're never disappointed at Canada.
Oh, what a diplomatic answer that is.
No, but seriously, I think the threat is there. This is not about fulfilling some number on some NATO decision or fulfilling the demands of an American president. We do this for ourselves and for our security because there is a clear threat, and this threat, you cannot wish it away. It's there. And this is why we're doing it, and we take that very, very seriously in Europe and in Germany.
In which case, should Germany reacquire nuclear weapons?
Well, the question of nuclear weapons is one which we already have solved in a way that we are partaking in the nuclear programs of other partners, or in the framework of NATO. This discussion about rearming or about having our own nuclear capabilities is one which is maybe starting, but it's not a serious discussion at this point. We still rely very much on our alliances, on NATO in this regard, and on the US. But of course, there's a discussion, should Europe be in a position to have its own nuclear capabilities or not? I don't think this is something that is part of the coalition agreement or anything that is around soon, but the question, how can we strengthen the European pillar of NATO? Is there any room for autonomy or sovereignty, European sovereignty in terms of nuclear facilities or capabilities? I think that's a question for the future, which remains to be seen.
Just for fun, I'm going to ask you the same question to see if you agree. What do you think? Nuclear weapons for Germany?
As long as NATO exists and is strong, the current arrangement has served everybody well. And at the moment, we are forbidden, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty prevents us from a nuclear armament. Should the security situation change dramatically in a way that these alliances break down, then I think many countries in Europe will ask themselves what the consequences are of this. And ultimately, there is a nuclear question at the end of that.
A lot of countries around the world, given the way America is today, are asking themselves whether they need to form new relationships, deeper relationships with other countries in order to isolate the United States because they are not the reliable partner they once were. Talk to us about Canada and Germany. Should we be establishing some kind of new thing or participating in some kind of new thing because America isn't the America we once knew?
I think we do have a multilateral framework which we need to preserve in the first place. This is true for the United Nations, for NATO, for the OSCE, where Germany and Canada are partners already. But in addition to that, and I share your impression that there's a lot of interest in diversifying, for example, the trade relationships that Canada has with other countries. And we in Germany are more than ready to look into these trade relations in investments, but also in the security cooperation. There's a lot of things that we can still do in science cooperation. If ever there's a need, we already have something that we can build on, so we don't start from scratch for sure. But looking at our relationship in terms of energy or raw materials leaves a lot of space and potential for the future as well. I'm not saying that to redirect trade routes from the US elsewhere, but I think Europe as a whole, and Germany in particular, has a lot of interesting things to offer as well.
You know, I heard an interesting idea the other day, which is that some people think Canada should join the European Union. What would you think about that?
Well, I'm afraid at the moment the European treaties prevent that because they clearly state you have to be a European country in order to join the European Union, and changing these treaties is a very difficult endeavor, as we have seen in the past.
But there are also interesting models, if I may add, like the Norway-EU relationship could be looked at more closely. And if we want, we find ways. And there are already things that we are discussing with our Canadian partners as the EU in terms of security cooperation, for example. And these are things that we should be exploring further, and I think there's a lot of things below the level of full membership.
What would you like to see happen with the German-Canadian relationship in light of the fact that America is not the country it once was?
Independent of America, I would like to see much closer military cooperation, especially in the maritime domain. I think there is a lot we need to do around raw materials. We need to diversify. Canada has a lot to offer. The problem is to get the stuff out of the ground. And then I would love to see more people-to-people relations. In Germany, we have a lot of city twinnings or sort of provincial-to-provincial relationships. I think there's still a lot we can do.
We did some of that 40 years ago, I remember.
Yeah,
and then we sort of stopped.
Yeah, I think that, to carry that relationship into the future and for young people to grow up with it and create these bonds, I think that would be something which would be very helpful.
As we're here in Toronto, I think Toronto's friendship with Frankfurt, or also Ontario's friendship with Baden-Württemberg, are very good examples on how this could work.
You know, I was in the Frankfurt airport a couple of months ago. I went over to meet my newest grandchild who lives in Switzerland, and I got off the plane, and the first thing I saw in the Frankfurt airport was a big advertisement for the province of Ontario.
You see?
In the Frankfurt airport. And I seem to remember, I think 40 years ago, is it Baden-Württemberg? Is that the name of the state? And Ontario had some kind of twinning relationship. But we got away from that. Do we need to get back to that?
I think it would be a good idea to get back to that.
I think it still existed, but maybe it's always good to inflate some new life and start working on that. And I think Canada and Baden-Württemberg are very close. Think of Lahr as one of the examples where so many servicemen of the Canadian Armed Forces have served. So there's a lot of connections.
The Canada-Germany Hydrogen Alliance. What is that?
The Hydrogen Alliance is, born out of the feeling that we want to have more hydrogen in Europe because we are trying to get away from fossil energy sources, especially from Russia. And at the same time, Canada is a country of vast opportunities when it comes to renewable energies, but also to hydrogen in all its forms. And if you look at the latest coalition agreement, you will see that we are still very much looking into possible ways to continue in hydrogen and bring more hydrogen from other countries to Germany in particular. And therefore, this will be very high on our agenda. We have signed this alliance in 2022, and then in 2024 we have already opened an H2 global window, which means that we are actually actually funding every sort of transaction between Canada and Germany with 300 million Canadian dollars from each side, from Canada's side, from Germany's side. And I think this will be something for the future which will have great opportunities. We are aware that, first of all, the production of hydrogen would have to speed up a little, but also the transportation of the hydrogen. But if you look at the Atlantic provinces, for example, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland in particular, you see that even green hydrogen, so one which is produced with wind energy, for example, can be produced, and then it just needs to be shipped to Germany or elsewhere, and we'll be very happy customers of Canadian green hydrogen.
Interesting. I want to ask you one more serious question and then one more not so serious question. So here's the serious one. Please complete this sentence. My time as Germany's ambassador to Canada will be successful if what?
If we manage to deepen these very strong relations even further and build new areas of cooperation.
Other ambassador, how would you answer that? If we manage to deepen the already... no, actually, if we manage to bring Germany and Canada closer together, especially in these difficult times that we're in, that we use or seize these opportunities which are now opening up with new governments, with the world as it is, but also in managing the ongoing wars and conflicts in the world, where I see a very strong role for both our countries in the framework of G7, but also individually.
Okay, and now my last not-so-serious question. Given the time we are in right now, namely the Stanley Cup playoffs, who is the greatest hockey player ever to come out of Germany?
For me, it's Leon Draisaitl, but he's not the top scorer of the NHL in preseason. But of course, this is my opinion.
And we like Tim Stützle as well.
We like Tim as well.
Okay, that I'm sorry, but that's a problem. That's a problem. Stützle plays for the Ottawa Senators, and while I have to be neutral in all things, I'm not neutral in hockey.
Yeah, we noticed.
Yeah, so that's a problem. All right, Draisaitl is the correct answer. Incidentally, he is the greatest ever. Can I also, just before we leave, thank you for this beautiful German chocolate that you have given to us here at TVO, and it has a little slogan on it that I think I've heard this before. Should I show it to this camera, Sheldon? What it says on there. What does it say? Canada is not for sale. Yes, that is a beautiful saying, and I look forward to devouring this chocolate with all of my friends here at TVO. So, Dankeschön. Das war ausgezeichnet. Dankeschön.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. And good luck for your future.
Good luck to the Leafs. And that is the agenda for Wednesday, April 30th, 2025. Tomorrow is World Press Freedom Day, and we'll look at how much the Fourth Estate is under attack. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.